It's very apparent to me, Mr. President, that there is an enormous amount of emotion that is invested in both of these subjects. And I would suggest to you, Mr. President, that I have learned over the years that the junior senator from Henrico is correct, that communication can facilitate a lot of courtesies. But the method of that communication is also very important. And I listened to the communication on this floor today, and I understand that the communication somehow evolved itself from a partisan redistricting discussion into a much more global issue that started to, in my opinion, unjustifiably and ill-advisedly embrace some very, very sensitive subject matters. And I suggest to you, Mr. President, that I think it is one thing certainly to concentrate on the process yesterday, and I will come back to that, but try to enlarge that into headlines that will certainly appear on the first page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch tomorrow, because they are so passionate and they touch such areas of sensitivity that many of us on this side of the aisle are hesitant to even stand up and speak on for fear of being painted with a broader brush. You know, I suggest to you, Mr. President, that I don't know how the discussion of the election of the president got rolled into this other than to try to buttress an inflammatory argument. I've consistently said since the election, I did not personally vote for President Obama. But in every public forum, in every partisan forum where I have been asked about that, I have said that President Barack Obama is my president, just as he is everybody's president on that side of the aisle. He is my president, and I have respect for that office, and while I might disagree with his policy direction, it does not mean that I disagree or disrespect him as a person. I say to you, Mr. President, that what took place yesterday may have been annoying, painful, and even strained some friendships in this body as it occurred. There is a difference between the procedure, which, whether you strictly embrace it or not, was totally consistent with the rules of this Senate. The substantive provisions are a very different thing, Mr. President, and somehow, as there are those who would like to sanctimoniously cloak themselves in a pious political shroud, that they forget what the substantive provisions were. And I would remind those who have been so critical of what happened yesterday, redistricting is always a combination of politics and policy, and that was what was dealt with yesterday. When the original redistricting plan came through, there can be cries of how collaborative it was, how inclusive we were, and it was so inclusive that individually it ran me almost from the North Carolina line to the outskirts of Richmond. And I recall on the last day, when there were those in that back room there making the final adjustments to that redistricting plan, and ultimately there was one individual who came out and got that close to my nose, and he didn't say, "This is the House." He said, "There is no more to be changed." And that came out, and that bill, even with those 11th hour adjustments, was voted out strictly on a partisan line. In other words, the will of the majority was invoked against the will of the minority. And that is the process. Now, I would say to you that I think, Mr. President, and nobody's going to remember a word that I say here today, and I fully appreciate that. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't remind those that, first of all, it corrected the inadequacies of the existing lines. It more completely adhered to the Voting Rights Act and subsequent judicial interpretation of that act. It insulated the Commonwealth from lawsuits filed under the Voting Rights Act. It rectified the failure of current boundaries to reasonably adhere to the provisions of one man and one vote. It corrects the egregious and gratuitous splits of localities that existed under those boundaries, which was voiced by registrars all across this state. Deliberately and intentionally and with calculation, they split towns, they split precincts, and they did it for one reason. And do not try to convince me that it was done for good governance or altruistic purposes. It was done with the deliberate intention of trying to maintain a Democratic majority for years to come, and I get it. I get it. But do not come in here and sanctimoniously suggest to me that there was any other reason. It further, Mr. President, included districts that are significantly more compact and less torturous than they have previously been. And I say that, you know, it is interesting to me, the selectivity of the approach on arguments, and I will never, in my best day, be as analytical and as articulate as the junior senator from Henrico, so I will just have to do my best in my own little way. We, on this side, did not come forward with a congressional plan that included a new minority-majority district. You know, I must have missed the effort from the Senate of Virginia that year to make any effort to create a new minority-majority Senate district. I think I missed that. And so for fingers to be pointed in this direction that you didn't do something on a congressional basis, that was very different. That entire Virginia congressional delegation came before this body and said, this is the plan we want. The entire congressional delegation, including the senator, former senator from Newport News, who sat right there. There was not one dissent. And we get criticized on this side because we didn't come up with something on the congressional delegation when we had already had the Senate redistricting plan stuffed down our throats because we were a minority. You all on that side were in the position to control it on this side. You had to negotiate with the people down the hall. So I say to you, Mr. President, and I really do say this, that last year was the most trying, stressful of 22 years that I have spent in the Senate. And it started the week after election at the Senate Finance Retreat at George Mason University. And I have not forgotten this. I got up there at George Mason and was talking with one of my friends on the other side of the aisle. The first thing out of that Democratic senator's mouth was, "We're going to sue you." First word. I am not going to lose my committee chairmanship that I have waited for 20 years to get without litigation. Wow. That's communication. I understood that communication very clearly, very clearly. But being naive as I am, I blew it off as being a passion of the moment, and that passion was going to subside. Well, you know what? It didn't subside. As a result of bruised political egos and not engaging in what my friends on that side thought should be an equal power sharing, embarked on a media strategy of communication to try and camouflage the fact that there were being obstructionists on a budget. And they did it with a skilled media approach on what they characterized as an attack on women, and I compliment you because your media skills far surpassed anything or abilities that we had. And I remember, Mr. President, perhaps you don't, that there were those of us who were working on trying to get a budget through, and vote after vote after vote was blocked by my friends on the other side. And there were all kinds of excuses. And I can't remember something that happened yesterday, much less last year. But you know what I do remember, Mr. President? 55 days into a 60-day session, the Senate Finance Committee, for the first time, gets a list of financial demands on why we're opposing the budget. 55 days into the session, because all of a sudden the media worm was turning and was starting to concentrate that though there were those who were being obstructionists on the budgetary process for reasons that were not quite as altruistic as were being stated. And the point of that, Mr. President, is that that is a chapter in history, and I can tell you when I came to Richmond this year, I had a fresh attitude and a fresh mind. And I said to the ladies and gentlemen on our side, we have got to start out 2013 without looking back behind us in the rearview mirror and look forward to see what we can do to move Virginia forward. And I thought we got off in that way. And I understand yesterday was not one of the finest days in the Senate. I understand why there are those that disagree and disagree vociferously with the process, not with the substance. I don't understand that. I do understand the annoyance with the process. But I say to you, as you reflect on communication, I hope that some of the subjective emotional comments that I heard yesterday, completely unrelated to the redistricting process, were merely a substance of emotions. To hear vitriolic comments like, there's going to be no transportation plan, there's going to be no education plan, those are policy issues that are going to be impacted by a political consequence. And I suggest to you that I am hopeful over the next few days that some friendships can be renewed. Unfortunately, sometimes friends disappoint friends, and there are a lot of reasons for disappointments. We can live with disappointments, but what we cannot live is being an obstructionist and blocking moving Virginia forward on vital issues like transportation, education, health and human resources, public safety, because we got our feelings hurt on a political move. So I am hopeful that we can reestablish an atmosphere to move Virginia forward, and I'm certain that my droll, boring comments will not be above the inflammatory comments in the media tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator. The senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.